Good morning. Welcome back to Christian Companions. As I'll always say, if you stumbled upon this video, this is a Bible study that usually meets at 10:30 on Sunday mornings for people 55 and older. So we go through some curriculum. So if you're watching this and you get confused, it's because we're reading through a book. But for everyone else who has the book and is usually watching, good morning and welcome. Glad to have you back. As always, I miss having you in here, but until that time that you can come, we'll do this. So, September 27th is the day. If you go in your books and look for that date at the top right, you'll see it, September 27th. This is Genesis 45, 1 through 8, and then 10 through 15. So, again, I'm going to say this, as I said the last 3 weeks. Yeah, the last 3 weeks. This is very narrative heavy. And so there's not a ton of theological points to break down. It's mostly just a story. So we're probably going to fly through it. Probably going to be another really quick couple minutes. So yeah, just bear with me and let's get into it. Genesis 45, 1 through 8, and 10 through 15. Excuse me. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I'll provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your households and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly." Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterward, his brothers talked with him. So, we're coming to kind of a conclusion of Joseph. I believe we have, this is going to be the last week of Joseph, but a little context for you. Lesson 3 covered the first trip that Joseph's brothers made to Egypt without Benjamin. Though they returned with food, it inevitably ran out, and the brothers were faced with traveling to Egypt again, but they knew they could not return without Benjamin. Jacob, however, was still very reluctant to allow Benjamin to go. Finally, after Judah guaranteed Benjamin's safety and offered to bear the blame should Benjamin not return, Jacob relented. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they first spoke to Joseph's steward about the silver they had found in their sacks. He assured them all was well. Later, after Joseph released Simeon and fed the brothers a meal, he sent them back to Canaan with more supplies, but he also instructed his steward to place each man's silver in his sack, and in addition to put Joseph's silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Following the brothers' departure, Joseph sent his steward to catch up with the men and accuse them of taking Joseph's cup. When the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack of grain, the brothers tore their clothing in despair and returned to Egypt to face Joseph. After Joseph told his brothers that Benjamin would have to remain in Egypt, Judah stepped forward and voiced an impassioned plea not to keep Benjamin in Egypt. Such an action would break his father Jacob's heart to the point of hastening his death. Judah offered himself in place of Benjamin. This act represented a drastic departure from the way Judah had treated Joseph those many years before. So yeah, there's a lot in between week 3 and lesson 3 and lesson 4 last week and this week. Lots going on. So yeah, but that covered it pretty well. They'd left, come back, and then it was a whole situation. Silver missing, capturing him, then this. So let's just jump in. Go right at it. Verse 1. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. In the commentary, At this point, it appears that Joseph had finally gathered enough evidence to be confident his brothers were not the scoundrels they once were. Listening to Judah's heartfelt plea not to keep Benjamin in Egypt and his offer to take Benjamin's place was more than Joseph could take. Joseph demanded that all his attendants leave the room. Perhaps this was because the reunion was so emotional for Joseph that he didn't want anyone other than his brothers to witness his breakdown. Or maybe he wanted to be able to speak openly without letting his Egyptian household know immediately everything that would be told. I think that's parsing too much, personally. I think he knows he's about to weep bitterly, and he doesn't want as many people around as possible. He just wants to be alone with his brothers. So that makes sense to me, personally. Verse 2, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph had been moved to tears on 2 occasions prior to this one, but at this moment, his emotions were fully released. Pharaoh's household must have wondered why they heard such intense weeping. Yeah. Well, and that's the interesting part about the kind of grammar of this. Either Pharaoh's household heard it as it was happening because it was so loud, or it was so profound that the Egyptians that did hear it talked about it later. So either way you swing it. Again, it's kind of like there's no need to parse it. There really isn't. Ultimately, what you need to know is he wept so much that it became almost like it became well known because it was just so loud and so much. So, as you would if you're reunited with your family. 3a, Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. We easily imagine the emotional shockwave that rippled through the room as the brothers heard this high Egyptian official claim in their native tongue to be their long-absent brother. Up to this point, Joseph had been conversing through an interpreter. The brothers must have found the statement incredible, even unbelievable, yet who other than Joseph himself would say such a thing to them, and in Hebrew no less. I mean, yeah, this whole section is wild from any perspective. Like, if you're the brothers, just imagine not seeing somebody for 20 to 30 years, really, and then all of a sudden you see them and they're like super wealthy and famous and powerful, and to the point where you don't recognize. I mean, and then they're also your relation, like they're your brother. I don't know. It's hard to fathom what the emotion must have been like in this. 3b, is my father still alive? So the brothers had no time to digest the shocking news before Joseph inquired as to the welfare of his father. Not long before this, the brothers had reported that Jacob was alive and well. Perhaps Joseph thought the brothers were simply being polite, not wanting to tell a powerful governor the truth of any family difficulties. I mean, yeah, I think is my father still living? I don't know. They have kind of said, my father will be disappointed, or my father won't be able to live through Benjamin staying here. And I think it's easier to read this as, is my father really alive? Like, is Jacob truly alive? Because, I mean, if the brothers are in disbelief, imagine how Joseph is feeling, having been sold into slavery and not thinking that he would ever see his brothers again, or his family, or his father. So he's in just as much shock. He's just had more time to process it, but still. So 3c, but his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Fair. The brothers had been stunned into silence. They seemed to have assumed Joseph to be dead, obviously, given their statements in Genesis 42:13 and 32. When we do the math from the time reference in Genesis 37, Genesis 41, 46, 41, 29 through 30, 46, 53 through 54, and 45:6, we conclude that what Joseph revealed had been some 22 years in the making. There he is. That's how long it had been since the brothers sold him into slavery at age 17. So Joseph was about age 39. Crazy. I mean, that's wild. Furthermore, the brother they had mistreated was now in a position of enormous power. He could throw them all into prison, or he could starve them by withholding aid. Would Joseph take revenge for mistreating him? Well, probably not. We have learned a lot about Joseph, and we've even skipped stories, and we can tell that he's not a vengeful guy. So we can continue by saying this. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." Just a great recap. The brothers were probably standing at a respectful distance from the governor of Egypt before Joseph called them forward. They may have even stepped backward in fear on hearing this man's incredible claim. Joseph's reference to their cruel deed bolstered his claim further. I mean, yeah, like, again, if you assume your brother's dead and then a strange man with lots of money and power comes to you and goes, "I'm actually your brother," you probably would be trying to put all the pieces together. Of course, they're silent, they're stunned, they don't know what to do. They're probably already were backed up. I mean, the scene paints itself. Verse 5. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. So Joseph had heard his brothers' remorse over what they did to him, but they didn't need to harbor negative feelings or bear a burden of guilt any longer. What had happened to Joseph was being used of God to save the lives of untold numbers of people via Joseph's preparation for the famine that was underway. Like Esther in Persia hundreds of years later, Joseph had come to his position in Egypt for such a time as this. The verse before us offers the first of 3 declarations by Joseph that God's sovereign hand had been carefully guiding all that had happened to him. God's work redeemed Joseph's sale into slavery and his experiences in Egypt. The brothers were indeed culpable for Joseph's servitude in Egypt, and the Ishmaelites really had brought him there. But Joseph had come to understand that God had used these circumstances for his own good purposes. In that way, it was as though God himself, not the jealous brothers, sent Joseph. Joseph's conclusions were undergirded by his experience with divinely given dreams and the ability to interpret them. In one sense, Joseph is simply stating Romans 8:28 in his own way. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Joseph's words to his brothers can be applied to our understanding and acceptance of the forgiveness Jesus offers. So often the issue with which we wrestle is not that of accepting Jesus' forgiveness, rather it's in accepting that we have been forgiven. We continue to beat ourselves up over the sins we've committed and the mistakes we've made. Such an attitude smothers any sense of joy or peace in having been forgiven. Blessings that are among that are among the many promised to followers of Jesus. Wow. Yeah, I think that's well stated. But truly, I mean, I think this just goes to show that he makes all things work together for our good, right? Like, I don't know. I think it's safe to say that had the brothers not taken Joseph and sold him into slavery, God still would have had Joseph come to power in some way and also save people from this famine. See what I'm saying? Like, God's ultimate plan was Joseph to be in a position of power and to save the region, the vast majority of humanity from famine by doing this thing with Pharaoh. So had the brothers come to their senses and not sold him into slavery, that's ultimately what still would have happened. See what I'm saying? Like, we always say God has a plan, but I think what you really need to see is sometimes when we do something wrong or sinful, or we go against what we think God's will for our life might be, God's plan can still come to fruition through that. See what I'm saying? So I think I think that's fair to say here too. He's saying, you didn't sell me into slavery in the end. God did, to bring about his purpose. Anyhow, verse 6. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping. Ugh. Joseph continued by placing events on a timeline of sorts. The bottom line was that things would get worse before they got better. Over the coming 5 years, agricultural activity would remain at a standstill. The desperation of famine would continue to be the case in many places, including Canaan, with no plowing or reaping taking place. Yep, it's a timeline. We'll keep moving. Verse 7, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So for the second time, Joseph stated his conviction that God sent him to Egypt. Despite the brothers' intent to do away with Joseph and his dreams, God's sovereign plan was being fulfilled. God's purpose in protecting Jacob's family is in keeping with his promise to Abraham. Joseph's declaration indicated that there would be difficult times ahead, but not total destruction. The manner in which Joseph treated his brothers is similar to how Jesus treats us by way of his death on the cross for our sins. We need not be terrified at his presence, even though he has every right to condemn us. He is willing to forgive. This was the attitude of Joseph, both at the occasion and later following the death of Jacob. And we'll learn here in not verse 8, but verse 10, that they'll go to the land of Goshen. We'll talk about this in a second. I'll hold that thought. We'll keep going through 8. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Again, repeated theme. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. So for a third time, Joseph emphasized that the brothers were not the ones who ultimately put him in Egypt. God had sent him there. Joseph had entered the land as a slave to end up in a position of great authority within Pharaoh's household and throughout all the land of Egypt. God is able to work through wrong attitudes and actions, and this is one example of that fact. That's kind of what I said. That Joseph referred to himself as father to Pharaoh is in keeping with usage of the word father in ancient times to describe someone who served as an advisor to another, perhaps in giving to a fatherly advice kind of idea. Compare Job 29:16. The image may also reflect Joseph's role as fatherly provider for Egypt during a time of great need. That one I buy less. This has caused some confusion, I will say, because a few pharaohs were children when they took the throne because their predecessor died when they were still young children. See what I'm saying? And so some question whether Pharaoh was actually a child, and that's why he even had trouble discerning something to do with the famine. See what I'm saying? Like, he said, oh, there's going to be a famine, and I don't know what to do because he's a little boy, and here's a 39-year-old man with God who's like, well, here's a plan, and he becomes that kind of second in command. So there is a kind of a question of, is he actually a fatherly figure to Pharaoh? I think, again, I said this a couple times already. I think that's kind of parsing things. I don't know. There's an argument to be had on both, whether it's this kind of traditional idea like from Job 29 where being a father to a king in that kind of verbiage means you're the closest advisor versus actually being a father. But ultimately, you need to know is God's the one that put him there. That's what I think is the most important part is, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. That's all you need to know. Verse 10, here's what I'm going to talk about. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. So verse 9, not in our printed text, records Joseph's plea to the brothers to return quickly to Canaan and convey a message to his father, Jacob. Joseph's message began with a statement that God had made him Lord of all Egypt, to urge Jacob to come at once to Egypt. In this way, Joseph provided an enduring example by giving credit to God for the things that have happened. Joseph might have been good-looking, intelligent, capable, and powerful. Remind you of anybody? Just kidding. But he knew that it is God who deserved the glory. Hopefully me too. It would not be easy for Jacob to leave the land of Canaan, since his grandfather Abraham migrated there over 200 years prior. Joseph made the new situation more attractive by telling them that they were to settle in Goshen. This is the first mention of Goshen in the Bible. It was located in the northeastern section of the Nile River's delta, which is a series of tributaries resembling a fan as they appear on a map. Goshen was a very fertile region, excellent for grazing and for growing crops. It would be more than adequate for the number of flocks and herds that Jacob and his family possessed. The entire family would have plenty of room to reside. Joseph had been separated from his beloved father, Jacob, for more than 20 years. He eagerly anticipated Jacob's being near him after such a long time. Joseph's hopes ended up being fulfilled. Yay, I get to draw my first map. Roughly. That's pretty rough, but I did it. So this is Egypt. I'll say this is modern. This is basically modern day Egypt, kind of. This is Canaan, or what will soon be in the scripture at least, Israel, Dead Sea, Red Sea. They'll cross there soon. So yeah, and this is the Nile. Yeah, and then sorry, I forgot the most important part is this. Goshen. And as the commentary said, it is unbelievably fertile. Beautiful land. I mean, this is all, you can't see me. I forgot the camera can't move. I just kept moving out. this, and I'll just move my hand all the way over here to like the ocean. Northern Africa is all desert. If you are a World War II buff, you know what I'm talking about. Northern Africa is desert. The only real fertile spots are where there's water, and so I would say a good 90% to 95% of ancient Egypt lived along this kind of in this within these dotted lines here. They all lived by the water, because outside of that is just desert. Like, you don't live anywhere. So this is the only place you can farm. It's the only place you can drink. It's the only place you can live. Goshen, again, is the choicest of that land because there's so many different tributaries and deltas and different things going on there. And so, yeah, it's unbelievable. I know I've told this story like about 100 times, but I had a professor who told me his grandmother used to sit on her porch in a rocking chair and just say, land of Goshen. I can't wait to be in the land of Goshen, because it's this idea of like a very heavenly, I almost said parasitic, but what I mean is like parasital of paradise. It's a very paradise-like place. Yeah, so that's where the land of Goshen is, though. And yeah, big deal. And it's worth noting, the majority, I would say, even of Egyptians lived probably like from there down on the Nile. There wasn't a lot going on up here. And so the fact that they had this choice land available is kind of strange, but it also goes to show that that's God's plan, because they had ample room for crops, for flocks, and to grow. Because this is one family coming in with the patriarch, the sons, the daughters probably, the grandchildren, soon the great-grandchildren. Soon this will become a spot where there'll be plenty of room for an entire nation, Israel, to grow and spread out, and then eventually need to leave. So, yeah, that's why. Here we go. Verse 12. No, verse 11. Yeah, verse 11. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household will all belong to, and all who belong to you will become destitute. Joseph promised to take care of both Jacob and his household through the duration of the coming 5 years of famine. This would save them the trips back and forth for the remainder of the famine, and deliver Jacob from living his final years in poverty and perhaps dying as a result. And also, Joseph gets to be with his family again. Like, there's not salvation, there's coming back together. Can't think of that word right now. Anyway, restoration, restorative relationship. Verse 12. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. So Joseph resumed addressing his brothers directly in a manner similar to how the risen Christ would reassure his disciples that he really was standing before them. Joseph told his brothers to believe what they were seeing. If they could not believe their eyes, they should believe their ears. Joseph had spoken to his brothers in their native Hebrew tongue without need for his interpreter. The specific mention of Benjamin, who is Joseph's only full brother of the 11 by Jacob's wife Rachel, reveals the closeness that Joseph still felt towards him. Yeah, I mean, they're probably only, again, they're the only two, and it's implied in the scripture before this, and scriptures before this, that Joseph, being 17, Benjamin was already alive, just too young to go out and kind of shepherd with his older brothers days away. So he knew full well of Benjamin. Benjamin knew him, and we'll kind of see that here in a second. Verse 13, tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. So Joseph wanted Jacob to know that far from being torn to pieces, Joseph had risen in honor, or to an esteemed position in Egypt. The brothers were to report everything they had seen in order to verify that what they said of Joseph was true. Joseph again urged them to bring Jacob to Egypt as quickly as possible. There was no time to waste. The great deliverance that was being accomplished by God would foreshadow the greater deliverance that he later brought about under Moses. Ironically, the migration of Joseph's extended family to Egypt was to set the stage for that event. Yeah, which there's gonna it seems ironic that Joseph's bringing them to Egypt, and then a couple generations later they're gonna have to break the bonds and leave Egypt. but I truly believe that, again, it's kind of God's plan. I think here you have all these various people groups, right? Like soon when they come, like when Moses and the Israelites get back to Canaan, they find that the land is populated with all these different people. So had they stayed there, they wouldn't have all this room and natural resource and availability of croplands to grow and stretch out and become a great nation. God needed a place for them to. It's kind of like when you put a plant in a pot and it grows and grows, and then you transplant it into the ground so it can grow and spread out. You know what I'm saying? I'm not much of a gardener, but I know that part's true. This is the pot. He's growing them in a pot, and then once they become big enough, plant them back to where he wants them to be permanently. So, yeah. Verse 14. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. Joseph's emotions once again came to the forefront as he embraced Benjamin. The feeling was mutual, for Benjamin embraced him, weeping. Doesn't need to be parsed. Verse 15. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Afterwards, his brothers talked with him. So Joseph then showed deep affection for all his brothers. This is quite a contrast to the first time he saw them in Egypt when he spoke harshly to them. One can only surmise what was spoken when Joseph's brothers talked with him. Joseph's forgiveness made reconciliation possible. These exchanges were followed by extensive preparations for the trip to Canaan and back. Joseph's final directives before the brothers leave is rather humorous. Don't quarrel on the way. That is kind of funny. That's good. Yeah, don't quarrel along the way. I wish they would have included that. But yeah, basically, never mind. I just think that's funny. So that's it. Yeah, I mean, that's Joseph's story in a very quick 4-week nutshell. He's betrayed. He's brought to power. He's forgiving, and then he is reconciled. So, yeah, pretty quick. Again, narrative is always going to be a little quicker. There's not much that you need to dissect and talk about here. But if you do have questions or comments or concerns or anything like that, you can always email me, samuelo@southrockchristian.com. Maybe someday I'll have like a little graphic that just comes across the screen, and it'll be like samuelo@southrockchristian.com. Or you can just call me, call the church. I'll be here. But yeah, I think that's about it for me. Again, as always, I miss you all very much. I wish you were in this room and we could talk and divulge and you could tell me how good of an artist I am, as always. But until then, I'll keep doing these, and hopefully, even if only one of you ends up enjoying it, it's worth it to me. I get to feel like I'm talking to you all. So, yeah, that's all I got. Hope you have a great week. I'll see you next time.